Hi, and welcome to another episode of Socratic Satsang. Our guest today is a neurodivergent, spiritually gifted healer. Welcome, Graham Skidmore.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. We're excited to go ahead. Let's start at the very beginning. Tell us who you are and how you got to being who you are.
Well, how I got to be who I am was definitely goes well beyond, this incarnation. But, I spent the first 40 years of my life understanding myself as, I call it, typical, normal, albeit kind of quirky or, misunderstood, not necessarily fitting in, and I've spent the last, and so I had a very traditional understanding of the game of life, what I'm supposed to do to succeed in life, what it means to succeed in life. And, I then had a very traditional corporate career. Thankfully I fell into some things I was very successful with. But at the height of my success, it was also the height of my burnout, my misery, and so I said, something's got to give. If I checked all these boxes the way that I was supposed to, in a materialist world, and, one based on capitalism and consumption, hey, I checked those boxes and I'm not happy. This stinks. I don't like who I see in the mirror. I don't even know who I am anymore. So I stepped away from the corporate world and corporate life and said, something's got to give. I got to figure something out. And so I spent the last 8 or 9 years understanding myself through a Western, Eastern, indigenous spiritual lens, which means that after I left, I said, all right, I got to start healing, feeling better about myself. So I went to the Western doctors and was like, all right, so what's going on? Like, how do I start feeling better? What's wrong with me? And they were like, well, all right, let's diagnose you with some stuff. And so I was diagnosed as autistic, ADHD, dyslexic, dyscalculia, Erland syndrome, alexithymia. And I don't know, then that was like, all right, that's cool. That kind of gives me enough to work on right there. And, and look, and it was very helpful at first, right? Because it gave me a new vernacular, a different way to understand myself, allowed me to put words to things and emotions and experiences that I couldn't before, helped me to understand why I experienced things differently, why there was misunderstandings, how, when it came to read the room, why I read the room differently and stuff like that. But then, that also then became with its, like any labels, then, it had its upsides, but then it also was very limiting to me. I found myself then starting to identify with the quote unquote the symptomatic side of things, and I found myself being much more fearful than I ever was. Anxiety, feeling helpless or hopeless, and really questioning what the rest of my life was going to be like, because certain aspects of me were starting to deteriorate, and I never experienced it before. And so then I kind of went through a series of spiritual awakenings and things like that, and started to understand myself and my wiring through an Eastern lens and spiritual and indigenous, and recognizing how I was actually I'm actually very gifted in being able to tap into the energies and the information around me. I just didn't know it, right? And so when I didn't know it, it was sensory overload. When I did know it, it was a beautiful new way of understanding the world. When I didn't understand my sensitivities to others' energies, or that I picked up on others' energies and thoughts and stuff like that, I felt like I was going crazy half the time and wondering why these crappy feelings of depression or anger, when I couldn't understand the root cause of it for myself. But then when I understood it through, a spiritual lens, I was recognizing I was picking up on other people's stuff, which, look, by better understanding the cause, I was better able to understand how to heal and understand get comfortable in my own skin, and then become comfortable in my reality. So I'll kind of pause from there, and that kind of then started me down a whole nother, path of life.
Wow. That's amazing. That's incredible. So you mentioned a couple of things. So you started kind of in the Western, with a Western lens, and getting the diagnoses, and that really shifted a lot of your perspective. Some ways really positive, some ways that were limiting. So one, I know when we talked last time, you mentioned, well, and actually this time, the feeling a little bit more fearful. So I wanted to dive into that a little bit more, kind of where that anxiety, kind of how getting the diagnosis increased anxiety. And then the other part, I really want to dive into the giftedness part, but we can go into that next.
It's very interesting when you are quote unquote successful in life, as determined by status or income or position, they diagnose you and understand you very differently, right? So like when I would go to executive coaches and otherwise, when you're successful, you're not quirky, you're not broken, you're eccentric, right? So, and if you use pharmaceuticals to get by, then it's accepted, right? And so anyhow, so I had to do a lot of unwinding and getting to understand myself and cut through a lot of the crap. But the fear and the anxiety, yeah, I mean, that was just horrible, because I went from being so confident and comfortable, like I can handle anything. I've accomplished so many things that that I didn't think that I would. I've accomplished so many things that people didn't think that we could do, or and so I really built my identity around doing things that others couldn't or didn't want to do. And so now it all of a sudden be like, I can't do this anymore. Things don't make sense to me anymore. I don't know how I'm going to be able to figure out how to relate to people, because I'm struggling to relate to people. And I no longer have in the work, I had assistants, I had, managers that reported to me, right? I had a support system and an infrastructure that I could kind of hide, or, well, frankly, it was built around me, right? So it was built around my quirks, my vernacular, my way of talking and dealing with things. But when all of that was gone, now all of a sudden I'm talking to people. It was like, I couldn't make sense. It was like, we're speaking two different languages, and I really struggled to find a common ground. And then, and so now I literally went from feeling on top of the world, I can conquer everything, to like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to work again. And that was, and so like I went through a whole identity change. I had to, I started like, struggling to put together sentences. And I started to, for the first time, to recognize how being in this fear-based perspective and this anxiety started to affect my psyche and then my health and all these other things, again, that I hadn't experienced before. So I didn't have reference points on how to fight my way out of it, right? And how to pull myself out of it. And so that was, and, Western medicine, is just kind of like, yeah, try this antidepressant, try, try this, try that. And believe me, I certainly benefited from, Xanax, Adderall, Wellbutrin along the way, right? But I was like, this is also inhibiting me from understanding things the way that I want to. I don't want to live my life with Band-Aids like this, right? And so anyhow, so then I finally got to a spot where things didn't work well enough, and I kind of had my own kind of breakdowns, and was like, please help me, like, what is going on here? And then I also had I'll stop there and let you take back over.
Yeah. So, I mean, from what I'm gathering, when you got the diagnosis, it was almost like feeling feeling othered in some way, like I'm different from others. Am I?
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely was like, wow, I understand why people struggle to understand me. I understand why I struggle to understand others. But then it became, well, if this is how it was, and I couldn't figure it out before, this means now am I just doomed, right? Am I just destined to have these problems? And that didn't exactly leave me feeling real confident and comfortable and excited about what my future looked like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant. That makes sense.
So what was the avenue to finding these other paths and the kind of Eastern indigenous traditions? How did you open up to that? How did that come to you?
So the first step was a friend of mine that I worked with, in my corporate days, who actually stopped working with me working for me. I'm doing air quotes, but because she was like, look, you're just such a pain in the ass. I can't deal with you anymore. Right. Like, you're so stubborn. It's got to be your own way. I'm going to another area of the company. Right. And so I only said, because that's important, because then later on a handful or so years later, we both left, we reconnected. And she was like, hey, you're like really psychic and stuff, right? I'm like, what are you talking about? No, I'm not. Whatever. And she's like, yeah, well, hey, when you're ready to explore yourself that way, let me know. So that kind of, that planted a seed. And then I slowly started to ask questions, get curious, understand what that meant, because my understanding of that was more of a pop culture, comic book, sci-fi, very, accentualized or sensational, versus a much more, after living it, it being much more practical and not nearly as, sensational as it was. So I didn't recognize those things. And then she also was kind of like, hey, this is up to you, but I'm kind of being nudged to share with you to do a mushroom journey. And, at that time, while I had a lot of vices, drugs really wasn't one of them. And so I was always a little nervous about stuff. And I also had this, just for whatever reason, right, I had this feeling that was like, hey, if you go down this path, there's a lot of responsibility and a lot of other stuff waiting on the other side of that for you. So you better be ready to accept that and to walk and totally change when you do that. So it took me about 6 months from when that seed was planted of doing a mushroom journey to actually doing it. And then, once I did it, I definitely, understood things very differently, understood myself very differently, started to understand the game of life differently, understanding my purpose and my, another calling and what I needed to kind of then do. And so that then really kicked off. Then I started to find other subject matter experts or healers to talk with and understand. And that was where I then, fell in and ran across people that helped me to understand myself from an Eastern and indigenous. When I say indigenous, it means a lot of that was really understanding how the world talks to me, understanding how to learn through nature, learn through the animals, learn through the nature spirits and animal spirits, recognizing the symbiotic relationship that we're meant to have with our surroundings, as opposed to the parasitic one that I kind of feel like is more of the status quo today. And so so that really changed a lot of my, so I had to rewire all kinds of my understanding and navigation from there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So in your introduction, you mentioned the word incarnation. What is your understanding of incarnations or of multiple lifetimes? And did mushrooms have anything to do with that? I'd like to know what you understood and what your views are right now on that.
Yeah, so I was not spiritual at all in my life. I never thought about God. I never thought about a creator. It's funny, as a matter of fact, I shared, look, man, I'll share this because I think a lot of people that are wired differently, that don't know it, go through this. Right. So I spent time, at between the ages of 15 and 16 in, psych wards and a rehab center. And this concept of a higher power was like, I couldn't grasp it to save my life. I mean, it was like, because I was so cognitive and I just couldn't understand anything that abstract. And it really, and it's funny. And now I think about it because, everything in my life is so spiritual based that it was, look, I was wired how I was wired, for the first parts of my life, so that for the purposes of, of my journey, which kind of goes to your point of, how I came to understand myself. And so how I understand myself today is, I'm a being of consciousness who just happens to be wearing a human suit to have a physical living and learning experience. And so my natural identity is consciousness. Right. And so, sometimes we take on a physical form and we live and learn and sometimes we don't. And so in that respect, when I say incarnation, it really just means taking on a physical form. And so I don't really think about things as, life and death. It's just more of physical, non-physical, and, we don't always remember, and so I come to think about past lives and otherwise. I know, everyone's experiences are different. For me, I don't necessarily, I have, some memories of different past lives. But for me though, it's a lot more about knowledge. And it's, and as I've kind of awakened, as I've removed the barriers between this self and my total self or my higher self, it's awakened wisdom and intelligence to me that I wasn't aware of before. Pardon me, got a little tickle in my throat there if I'm starting to come across a little froggy.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
A lot of what you said sounds almost like you're quoting from some of the Hindu texts. I don't know if that's coincidence or if it's deliberate, but either way, it's literally like you're pulling out from the Vedic texts. I love what you said, but I think Kirstyn has a question before my next question.
Oh, yeah. Well, I love the last part that you said where you're kind of, there's less of a barrier between yourself now and this higher self. So I'm curious how you kind of opened that portal or whatever you would call it.
Yeah. So that definitely, the mushrooms definitely played a factor in that. Mm-hmm. Right. And, and really, I guess, well, interestingly, I don't know how to describe the first time, I went through any time that I felt like the need that I was being called to go through a major transformation, I was called to do a journey. So I've had a 3 or 4 over the course of, 5, 6, 7 years. But the first time it happened, I almost felt like, I felt like in my head, like this, like unfolding of like a box that just all of a sudden got bigger. And then all of a sudden I started comprehending things that I couldn't comprehend before, understanding things I didn't understand before, knowing things I didn't know before. And I woke up, and I guess, I kind of woke up the way that I died, so that was kind of like that was kind of an interesting experience. And so then from there, it was just all of a sudden, once I came out of the journey, it was like, okay, so that happened. So there's more to me than that. And, and then from there, it was just a matter of understanding things. And so to your point, Vin, it was weird as I started to understand myself this way. But then when I read different stuff, like, especially in Hinduism, which is, is beautiful and has got a lot of, great information in it, I was like, oh yes, that's exactly what those are words that describe what I experienced. Those are words, and so in some ways it was then very validating. So it was kind of interesting to all of a sudden know this stuff just inherently, but then read about it and now be able to put better words to it, explain it, kind of gave me a vernacular to my experiences.
That's absolutely beautiful. Spirituality seems to play a huge role in who you are and what you're doing. We'll get to what you're doing right now. But before that, what is your definition of spirituality?
Yeah. So for me, being spiritual or living a spiritual life occurs at the intersection of being philosophical, magical, and mystical, or understanding, living a philosophical, mystical, magical life. It's at the intersection of those things for me.
Tell us about the work you're doing now, because I think that there's a lot of people who can benefit from your services and the work you're doing and your nonprofit.
Yeah. And so, so it's kind of this, you're right. I mean, everything to me ties into spirituality, right? Like the ideas, the knowledge to do what I've been able to do, the ideas for this next chapter of life. And, and my belief systems have all totally changed. So, like 10 years ago, Graham, if you would have asked me about AI, I would have been like, oh yeah, absolutely, man. Of course we should be using technology. And, if humans can't get on board, people can't figure this stuff out, then we'll use technology to replace them. I was the absolute total capitalist mindset of, make money. That was what I thought, what we were supposed to do. Now I'm the exact opposite, which I'm like, holy cow, I just went through this wonderful experience. I realized there's so much more to me than what I realized, and there's so much more to all of us than what we realize. And so while, AI is a great tool and everything, for me, my beliefs, the greatest opportunity that we have is investing in humans. And it's not just but it's investing in humans as individuals with individualized physiologies to understand our individualized potential, right? And with AI, AI can facilitate with that as a tool to help us. But it should help us to improve our agency, to complement us, not for us to give up our agency or to overtake us, right? And so my work in the nonprofit space is starting in health and wellness, because if I'm, right now the kind of the limiting belief system is, we're kind of born how we're born and we are what we are, and we got a little bit of upside if we go to school and stuff like that. But generally speaking, the way the common narrative is, in order for humanity to unlock its next chapter, we're dependent and we're reliant upon AI. And I'm like, whoa, not even close. Consciousness is the key to the next evolution of humanity. But but me going out there and saying that, I mean, that's just somebody else screaming on a street corner, and that's not very effective. If I want to demonstrate that we need to be investing in humans, well, then I got to demonstrate it, right? And so by being in health and wellness and helping others to recognize their own individualized physiology, understanding their own journey, understanding themselves as an individual, learning how to become comfortable and confident in their own skin, how to understand their individual gifts and abilities, and taking and like me, right, taking people that would have been thought of as broken, or having disabilities, or problems and challenges that not feeling awesome about our future, to all of a sudden transforming that individual like myself into feeling comfortable in our skin, loving who we see in the mirror, recognizing all of these. We didn't make all these mistakes in our life. They were catalysts to help us get to where we are. They were part of our living and learning experience. And then recognizing that our gifts and abilities and how to use them, and then untapping these additional gifts and abilities and wisdom and intelligence and ability to comprehend. Now, and so now we've increased the potential of humans, and then once we start to demonstrate that we of increasing the potential of humans, now we can start to make a much larger case why we need to be investing in humans and investing in a view of consciousness as the basis of reality, as opposed to the Western paradigm of materialism as the foundation of reality.
Lovely, lovely. Can you walk us through a case of someone you helped and how that unfolded?
Yeah, I'll take my partner, Dr. Jamie. She's both my partner and co-founder in the Harmony Health Institute, as well as life partner. So interestingly enough, I shared parts of this story before. As I was going through my journey, and I think there's a lot of people probably run through this, right? Where they don't run in parallel paths with their partner. So that's kind of why I'll back up the bus a bit. So, I'm going through my changes, and I've been going through this mushroom journey. And now she came from a very traditional Christian background. So, you come, coming home and being like, hey, guess who's psychic? Guess who's a medium? Guess who can channel? Right? That's not exactly going to go over real well. And so I'm talking to my friend Jen and Sunshine, and I'm going this is getting really hard for me to kind of live this dual life like this. I don't know, and so I just got to keep going with it. And so anyway, so I kept going through my stuff. And then one day, I get a lot of insights in water. And so I was in the shower and kind of meditating and trying to get some insights on this. And it came to me to talk to her and say, hey, look, you're giving up your authority. And so I don't know where to go from this, but this is what I was given to tell you. And so, so I get a shower and I'm like, hey, Jamie, I got to talk to you about something. And I said, I don't know how else to say this besides just to tell you that I'm been given this this message to share with you. And she's like, kind of looks at me really funny. And I'm like, oh boy, where's this going? Right. And because, at this point in time, I had to make the decision of, am I willing to sacrifice everything around me for my spirituality, for my own journey, for my own understanding? And so I had to be willing for her to walk away from me. Right. So there was definitely some fear about that, but there was also comfort and confidence because it also felt right to me. And I also knew, though, if it was meant to be and we were supposed to be with each other in this next chapter of life, then it would unfold that way. Right. And I had to have that faith. And so she was like, hey, check this out. So she takes me in her bathroom and she opens up her mirror, and written on the inside of it was authority.
Wow.
Jeez.
She was in the middle of the night. She was prompted to get up and write, authority on the inside of her mirror. And so obviously, thankfully her faith was, went beyond religion and and so she was all of a sudden open to these things. And so now I was explaining to her like, hey, this is kind of what I've been going through. And, look, you've got a lot of your stuff as well. And so that then led to helping her to understand herself, through a spiritual lens, and understand her gifts that she had been like me, right? These things that through fear, guilt, shame, anxiety, conditioning, right?
Yeah.
We didn't know about it, right? It was, and then that also, led to, some trauma healing led to, I'll just, look, I always get uncomfortable sharing this because I don't want to, it's her story to tell, but part of this is part of our journey and what we're offering to the world. So I'll share it,
Yeah.
which was, she was struggling with some menopausal symptoms and intrauterine bleeding. And, and so I was able to share with her how, like by healing some of the fear, anxiety, trauma, how that was able to heal, that intrauterine bleeding and as well as and as well as the menopausal symptoms that she was having. And it wasn't just luck that this happened this way, because she used the same trauma healing protocols with some of her girlfriends and who had the same challenges, who didn't want to go through invasive surgery to, as the which is the Western approach, which is, hey, let's just do some uterine scraping or remove your uterus to stop the bleeding. Instead, she shared the trauma healing protocols with them. And when they were able to, transform that, believe it or not, the trauma from gratitude, not necessarily gratitude from what they experienced, but gratitude from the learning that it was, and being able to reframe it that way, right? Their symptoms also stopped. So, so we have 3 or 4 cases of that. And so the audiences that we serve in while we're open to everybody, of course, the areas of specialty are women's health, neurodivergent, and spiritually gifted. Audiences that are underserved, in the Western approach, and can definitely benefit from having an individualized physiology being recognized and learning how to understand themselves as individuals. And so that's a lot of what we do is we provide the education, the tools, and the systems to support that individuality, as well as service providers and practitioners that will honor people as individuals with their own lived experience.
It sounds like you're working on a one-on-one basis with each person individually, because each person's solutions and issues would be unique to them. Is that
Yeah,
right?
it is. We do have a technology tool called Janus, which stands for the God or Goddess of New Beginnings, as well as the acronym, just another neurodivergent uplifting society. And one of my gifts is being able to understand the intelligent design, or the concept of Earth as a living and learning environment, or Earth as a classroom, isn't anything new, right? But one of my gifts is being given that information of, here's the lessons that we're all here to learn. Here's what the overall curriculum is. And so I'm able to take that and provide that, use technology as a framework for people to help understand it for themselves. And let me be a little bit more specific, is that, what I share is that, what we're here to learn on Earth is it's the understanding of, it's maintaining love through adversity. And how do we maintain love through adversity? Well, it's under the understanding of divine love, while having the courage to do what is right, while gaining the wisdom to operate in the highest good of all through stewardship. Right. And so while, learning how to so the concepts of learning how to love ourselves and love others is the same for all of us. How and the catalyst that we're given to understand that is different and is individualized. So I can use technology to help people to reframe, hey, how somebody made you feel unworthy? No. And so you could either use that to feel unworthy, or you can recognize how what you went through is what makes you who you are, recognize that that's what makes you strong, recognize that that's what makes you intelligent, recognize that firsthand experience is what also in some cases allows you to help others. And so it, without that catalyst, you wouldn't have learned how to love yourself the same way. Right. And so there is a kind of a generic framework, but from there, not everybody is going to feel comfortable, walking themselves through some of that learning path. And so that's where, hey, we absolutely, the one-on-one conversations and guidance, is there as a complement. But what really matters is somebody being given the choice to, create their own individualized journey, leverage technology, and kind of self-guided when they want to, and, and engage with humans when they want to.
That's powerful stuff.
Amazing. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I've got two questions for you. I'll bundle them into one. You can answer it as two separate questions or bundle them any way you like. So one is, what is your definition of consciousness, since you use the word? And second is, you just mentioned love being this powerful element. So what is your definition of love?
Ooh, wow. All right. You may have to do some editing here, because I might need to think about this for a moment. So, at the simplest level, being conscious means being able to comprehend, and expanding our consciousness means expanding our ability to comprehend. And the ways that we comprehend are, we have traditional five senses, and then we have additional senses beyond that. Right. And so, so when we think about, everything around us being energy and information, things like being clairsentient, clairvoyant, clairaudient, claircognizant, those are just descriptions of how we tap into the consciousness around us. And I think of consciousness as just a library of information. And right. And so so that kind of spiritually giftedness, or that wiring, is the way that we wired our physiology before incarnating, to be able to tap into the information that we needed to support and guide us through our individual living and learning journey, to get the experiences that we wanted, to get the knowledge that we wanted. And boy, and defining and divine love. How would I describe divine love, or even love? I mean, it's the basis of everything, but that doesn't describe it. It's it's something that has to be experienced to really be felt, to be understood, to be supported. Um, and you have to understand love almost in it from a parental way to understand why, to be able to both to understand the intelligent design and to understand why things are the way that they are, because we're being taught. And the same way that, there's the tough love, there's the gentle love, there's the nurturing love, there's the compassionate love. um so I guess love is a way, in some ways it's a way of being, it's a way of interacting, it's a way of understanding. It's the reason why being able to better understand it is the reason why everything exists. It's the reason why everything was born, right? The same way that humans have chakra, in some belief system, the chakras are learning modules. Well, for the universe, if you think about astrology, and each planet has its own energy and knowledge that's associated with it. So, the universe creates planets as learning modules, the same way that humans have chakras as learning modules, and they're all based in understanding love in some various way. Um, yeah, I don't know that I could, besides how it plays out. Yeah, I maybe, if it comes to me, I'll definitely come back if I think of a better way of how to just define love besides the reason for being and the foundation of everything and the meaning behind everything. I don't know.
Yeah, that's pretty deep.
Yeah, I like it. And I like that you incorporated kind of multiple types of love. I mean, including tough love, or that and of course there's romantic love. There's you think of you think of compassion so oftentimes, right? With love, I don't know, I bring those two together a lot. And I think one of the questions I had as you were discussing, we're talking about it, and this is not the question I'm going to bring, but does love have accountability? Is there an element of accountability within love too?
Wow,
Yeah.
quite a thought.
Look, I think there's a huge, well, look, free will is not a privilege. Free will is all about accountability and responsibility. Right. And so, and then I want to touch base on the love and that accountability. Yes, because people can look around and go, Graham, if this is a creator of love, a universe of love, a source of love, why is there such a lack of love? And
Yeah.
so, and so I do want to touch on that, because it's so important, because so many of our problems on this planet come as a result of the conflict between the man-made intelligent design, or the status quo that we live in, and the divine intelligent design. So let's not forget that, think about, the creator, source, God, however somebody wants to identify with it, provides the raw materials, but humanity is still responsible and accountable for what it builds and creates with those materials. Right. And so, so we all know what we're getting into before we incarnate. While some of us may have been victimized, none of us are victims. We all designed, especially right now, there's, you look at like the Me Too movement and you say, how, Graham, where's this love? You say, no, you want to talk about, that is actually all of these women that went through this. That's the love of one person, of one entity for humanity, because in order for us to go through this evolution that we're going through, this justice through restoration process, it requires getting back and operating and in tune with that divine intelligent design. And so we need people that challenge themselves and said, look, I'm going to go through some really shitty experiences in order to have firsthand experience of how to heal myself so that I can heal others. And so some people look at these people as victims. I look at these people as some of the strongest people on this planet, because they made a conscious choice to go through this, to help others, right? Talk about being in service to humanity. Talk about being in service to your fellow man and woman. And so, and so much of us right now have made the choice to go through a lot of tough experiences to learn and experience that love so that we can share it with others. And I think, and I think if you haven't gone through that process of reframing mistakes or errors or faults as catalysts to grow, catalysts to learn how to love yourself, catalysts to recognize your strength, catalysts to for personal growth, catalysts to recognize your worthiness, then it's hard to understand how those challenges can actually be used, are fueled by love, right? And I think that, it's easy to say, well, if we loved ourselves, why wouldn't we just um, make it easier? Well, let's take a look at a lot of that let's make it easier is what's been going on out there in humanity. And what has that done to the children? Are they stronger? Are they better prepared? What's their quality of life look like? Right. So it's one of those, appreciate the concept and the theory, but what you see in the way that it's playing out, it's not loving to not prepare somebody to be able to take care of themselves. It's not loving to hide somebody from truth. It's not loving to, not allow somebody to experience life and all of its good, bad, and ugly that it has to offer. Right. And this goes back to that love through adversity. Why is it so important to learn how to maintain love through adversity? And that's because we're meant to be powerful beings. We're meant to be able to do more than what we are right now. I know that, there's this impression that this is the most advanced humanity's ever been. Well, I'm on the other side of that, which is we're experiencing de-evolution right now. Let's not confuse technical advancement for, intelligent advancement. And so and if you're going to be a powerful being and you're going to be given power, you're going to be given gifts and abilities, well, then it's really important that you learn how to self-govern and not abuse them as well. And so that's where maintaining that adversity so that we learn how to not misuse our gifts and power is so important. And so look, as part of the learning experience, there are people then that as part of their learning experience, they're given power to see if they abuse it. And, until they're able to recognize and use it for the highest good. And so we're not all here to learn the same things. We're not all here to learn the same ways. But when you understand how we're all meant to learn, which includes doing trial and error. And so they say, well, that's part of the reason why we don't remember our past lives and our past experiences, because look, frankly, it's not as nearly as beneficial to remember all the ugly we did to get to the learning experience to have the moral compass that we have today, right? We all got to if you think about it, somehow we all came into this world with our own morals, beliefs, moral compasses, and character that guides us. Well, that comes from all of the experiences of recognizing, okay, well, you know what? I do want to fight back. I was tired of being bullied. This time I want to be a bully. I want to know what it means, what it feels like. And only after sometimes punching somebody back do you recognize that doesn't give me what I wanted. Right.
Yeah.
But we had to go through that to get to where we are. And so it's the grace and love of the universe, God, source, creator, whatever, as well, that allows us to not have to remember those experiences and just have the wisdom and the moral compass. So anyways, I think I gave you a very long answer and went on a tangent to your question, but I don't know, it just kind of started rolling. So I went with it.
No, I love it. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Very fascinating. I actually would have a lot of questions come with that, but I know we're also limited on time. So one thing that what?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. One thing that stood out to me in something you'd said earlier, which I think is actually really important, is sometimes people don't really talk about the risks of stepping into who you fully are, and what that might mean to the world that you've kind of created around yourself when there's that shift. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit more.
No, I'm so glad you asked, because look, I think that's so much of our quality of life is determined by our expectations, right? About how we think things are going to be or what they're going to be. And, when I, think about, and what my impression or expectation of having a spiritual awakening or being exposed to things was it's all additive. Right? It's like I get to be what I am today, but I just know more. I get to have more, right? And instead, what I realized was it was more like a death by or 1,000 deaths, or deaths by a bunch of paper cuts, because it was and as a result of that, right, it became, in order to become, as like I say, as part of that spiritual awakening, right? What that really was an unraveling of who I become to get back to my genuine and authentic self. In over 40 years. Boy, that pain, guilt, conditioning, trauma, anxiety, had all kinds of layers, piled up on top of me. And, and kind of, in the same way that kind of like, for those that remember Friends, not fun Bobby, he was the guy who was a lot of fun to hang out with when he was drinking, but the minute he stopped drinking, obviously it wasn't so fun to hang out with anymore. Right. And so it was kind of like that with spirituality. People that liked me, the people that liked me when I would go out, boozing and gambling and being a wild, crazy man, all of a sudden when I wasn't that way anymore, we just didn't have those connections. I had a friend of mine who just, what was it, last year, whatever. He's like, so what do you mean you don't smoke weed anymore, and you don't gamble, and you don't drink, and you don't party, and you're not gambling, you golf. So why are we hanging out again? Now, he said that half joking, but there was also another half of truth to it, because we just didn't have those same commonalities, right?
Yeah.
And so it was like, yeah, man, we've got this friendship, and I can still call you if I'm stuck on the side of the road and you'll help me out. But yeah, we do. But, my social circle, what my day-to-day interests were, what our interests were together, what we're going to talk about, what I enjoy, what you enjoy, is certainly different. And look, and when you start talking about, being spiritually gifted or psychic or medium or channel, or, talk about, energy and information around us and tapping into that, look, people will also look at you like you're crazy, right? Depending on their own individuals and my favorite is, well, oh, you got to go find God. You need Jesus. You're out there. You've become tainted. You're talking to the devil, right? So people will go all that kind of way with you. Right. And it was funny. Yeah. It was like, well, actually, as a result of all of this, while I don't align with any religion, I'm much more have a greater connection to a God, a creator, a source, things of that nature. And so yeah, it's very risky, because once you open up that bottle, Pandora's box, let the genie out of the bottle, there's no going back.
Yeah.
Right. And so people have to really, I think it's an important decision that somebody has to be ready to say, am I willing to adjust my life? And to your point, I've had one of the most common conversations I have with people on this topic is, how is this going to affect my relationship? Right. And so, one conversation was with a gentleman who, his spirituality kind of took him down another path. And his wife was like, hey, I'm happy to support you, but like, when are you going to start making money again? We had these life goals together, and now you're the one that changed, not me. Right. So how do we kind of maintain growing together, or don't we grow together? And so, and so this really, having open communication, being honest about what's going on, becomes so critical and so important. And that putting a very conscious effort into growing with each other is a cornerstone to making sure to preserving a relationship if it's meant to be preserved, but also recognizing that relationship might have been, hey, what got me here isn't what's going to get me there. And look, and that's another tough conversation in the mirror to have.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. It's really powerful. I have another one.
Yeah.
Okay. Another one I want to go back to, and it kind of, we've been touching on it throughout, is kind of this giftedness. And you mentioned early on that you'd experienced a kind of a sensory overload when you were younger, kind of maybe even before understanding autism, and then having the words of sensory overload.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm curious how those two things tie together. What you now be able to say, this would have been sensory overwhelm. Now I can see this as giftedness. And yeah, what does that look like?
Well, yeah. So like, look, growing up, I never understood why I was tired all the time. Right. And a lot of it was because I was taking in all of the sensory and I didn't know. It was like a car radio who couldn't tune into the right station. It was always, it was like constant statics. I was like in between 3 or 4 stations. And so they were all coming at me, but I couldn't hone in to what it was to listen to. And so then that also meant, that energy, that extra energy accumulated in the form of, aches and pains and joint aches and pains. Let's see here. I'm trying to think of how else and then also just, there was this constant nervous energy, the inability to sit still. I always felt like energy, or, I don't want to say, energy was coming in and I had to let it out on the other side. And so for me, that meant being wild. It meant engaging in my, in things that would, increase my adrenaline. Or like, look, in the case of gambling, it was look, for me, gambling was the one place that I could go. Look, I made a couple of bucks, so I was, would go into the high limit room and be able to have a table to myself. So for once in my life, it was about me. I didn't have to deal around others, and I could finally just exhale and just not care about the consequences. Like, I'm not saying it was correct. I'm not saying it's productive. I certainly don't recommend it to people, right? But look, I did the best I could with what I understood how to do at that moment in time. And so it was, for me, it was always figuring out, pressure was coming in the top of the funnel, and then how did I find a release? And golf was another one. On the Saturday and Sundays, I would, start drinking and playing golf at, 9 or 10 in the morning and stop at 9 at night. So yeah, I mean, I would be, and then I would essentially just go home exhausted, you know, typically half in the bag or all in the bag, fall asleep, wake up the next day, do it again. But that was then how I, kind of wore myself out so that I could be ready to go on Monday again. But, and then, during the work, I mean, what I would look at my calendar and I would say, okay, based on the meetings and who they were with and the topics, when do I need to take a Xanax to make sure that I'm chill and that I can deal with these people? But then based on when I take the Xanax, I'm going to start to then get a little sleepy. So when do I need to take the Adderall to kind of then lift me up as well so that I could, have that? And that was literally how I would do things when I would do, public speaking, at the office. It was, again, okay, when do I take the Xanax? And so when does that peak out? So I'm chill enough on stage and not talking about sensory overload, talking to 1,000 people, not having all those eyes looking at you distract you. But then I would have to then, time that with Adderall, and then I would get a tea to have a little bit of caffeine. So it was instant kick right when I was up there. Right. And that was how I managed things. But again, when you're successful and you're using pharmaceuticals, hey, it's much more acceptable than if you were to be, doing non-traditional things, right? Like if I was just, I just, smoked a joint before I had to speak to get calm. Whoa, that would have been hugely taboo. But if I take a Xanax, hey, that's cool.
Yeah, it's strict to that.
Right. So it's very interesting how there's, these double standards. And then not only that, but then you mind screw yourself as well. Oh, well, this is normal. This is acceptable. I'm not abusing anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So hopefully there's some of your listeners are like, can relate to something. I don't just share this ugly for, for shits and giggles. I want people to I want people to see parts of themselves in these stories, to recognize that there is more to them, and to start to get them thinking and get curious. And also, most importantly, give themselves grace, right? Instead of beating themselves up over why can't they figure this stuff out? Why am I doing these things wrong? No, in many cases, you just weren't taught how to understand yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. And kind of just to go a little further into it. So some of the things that you were receiving or kind of experiencing and not kind of having words for it, do you feel like that is tapping into kind of this energy that you're now able to kind of read differently and trying to, like, do you understand those, that kind of overwhelm differently? And like, do you see it a different way of, like,
yeah, no, do you mind? Yeah, let me try to jump it. So for me, I would describe when I didn't understand myself and my wiring, I was a set of symptoms, which was the neurodivergency lens for me.
Mm-hmm.
However, once I understood myself, I no longer have those symptoms. I no longer experience that overload. Right. I now recognize things. Here's an example of it. When I talked earlier, I mentioned, how people's emotions around me affected me, and I didn't realize it. So now one of the things I've recognized about my wiring is when I'm experiencing somebody else's emotion, it's actually a heightened emotion. So it's, so all of a sudden when I feel a spike in something, I'm recognizing that I'm picking up on somebody else's stuff. Which, again, from a healing perspective or being a healer, having conversations, it's a great way to ask somebody something, how they're feeling, because they may not even recognize that, the fear, the anger, the anxiety, or, other body pains. And so, so now, and then once what I've realized too is when I didn't know how to identify those things? Well, because they're given to me as information, right? So the body is like, hey, yo, you're supposed to learn this. So it's going to stay with you until you figure it out. Well, when you don't figure it out, it still stays with you. So it just accumulates. Now, once I understood it as information, it no longer accumulates and it's gone. So I don't have that overload anymore. It doesn't stick with me. And so, yeah, so it kind of, some of that went away on its own. And some of it, went away as, through just relearning behaviors and learning for it to, but that's what I recognized was, hey, if something's like ruminating thoughts is another one, right? I've recognized that ruminating thoughts are either fall underneath somebody else's thoughts that I'm picking up on, or it's something that I'm meant to do or to figure out. And then my feedback loop to know that that's the case is that they stop. Once I either recognize whose thoughts that it were and deal with it, or I learned what I was supposed to learn and figured out what I was supposed to figure out, then it stopped. And so that was kind of then again that feedback loop of how I learned how to work through those.
When we started our conversation, you mentioned the relationship of humans with animals.
Oh yes.
Parasitic to a symbiotic. Now, personally, we love animals, both of us, and it's on our agenda to put up a farm at some point. And she's grown up with horses. I've got my German Shepherd right at my feet right now. And I don't know if you could hear her for a while. So we have this very strong bond with our dogs, with our animals. My Shepherd feels everything I feel.
Yeah.
She knows what's going on with me as it's going on, and it's in
beforehand, I would say.
That's true. Beforehand.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. And is there any animal that you identify with?
Yeah, well, this goes back to the stewardship thing, right? If we're gonna, and why we're meant to pick up on energy as part of the human spectrum and being a normal human, right? Is because we don't. While we all make verbal noises, but we don't all understand each other's verbal noises. The ability to understand and read energy is universal, and a lot of that energy is in emotions. And so I'm so glad you mentioned that. That animals pick up on that from us, and we pick up on that from them. And just the same way that we have some humans are more in tune with that energy and are more sensitive, same thing with animals, right? We're all together. And it's interestingly enough, I wasn't that really most of my life, I felt like, be kind to animals, don't necessarily be cruel, right? But I didn't necessarily have a connection with them. I didn't recognize how we're meant to learn through them. Right. And also how they are provided to teach us and guide us. For example, would we have ever figured out flight if it wasn't for birds? Would we have ever had the imagination to think about flight if we didn't see something else flying in the air? Right. And so that's an example of how that, and also look, if you look at animals and how they take care of an ecosystem, right? If you, there's all kinds of studies out there about, I can't remember what it was, but all of a sudden some beavers descended on an area and what was, broken down, and now all of a sudden is a flourishing ecosystem in just a year or two. Right. Right. So, I mean, just allowing, the intelligence within nature to fix and heal itself, and that we're meant to watch and observe and learn the different aspects and what creatures contribute to what part. And you think about being a chemist and intaking information and intaking, not my information, but chemicals, light, rain, water. Well, that's what all of the plants that's what all of, the plants around us do. Right. And so when you start to and you start to look at everything as a living ecosystem and how everything contributes, then you can understand how humans are meant as stewards to maintain this. The rest of the world isn't ignorant and dumb and humans all of a sudden need to save it. No, humans are meant to observe and learn through it and learn how things work in harmony with each other. And that's part of that symbiotic relationship. Obviously so many things have changed, over the time, and the relationship with animals and the roles that animals play is very different. What we're seeing today is reflective of the man-made intelligent design, not so much the human intelligent, or not the divine intelligent design, but a couple of relationships that have become very important to me since my awakening has been my relationship with squirrels. And for whatever reason, right, like I was like, one day I was like, I got to figure out how to make friends with squirrels. don't know why. It's just where where I felt drawn to do it. And so, like anything, look, providing food is certainly the easiest way to make friends. And so I started providing food, and then I just started to just watch, and I started to learn. And and some of the things that I watch, with all animals, is their ability to just be present, right, is second to none. They don't operate from a place of fear, but yet there's always something around them that's trying to eat them. Right? They all have predators, right? But they don't operate in fear. They are present. They do their thing. They have their they have their awareness. They all, and then, again, and they'll have their roles. And one of the things that's great about squirrels is their curiosity, right? And their playfulness. And so they remind me to learn through being play, learn through being curious. They also say, look, they also have a balance between, you know, eating what's being provided for them, but also storing something away for the future, and having that balance between those things. And so so believe it or not, I'm in downtown Chicago right now. And you don't think of a lot of nature, but again, one day I was going for a walk and I felt guided to kind of go to this certain area. And so I did. And so I found some squirrels. So so I started tossing them some nuts, and, I definitely, some people like the influence that I've had, some people not so much, more yes than no. And so now literally I have squirrels that, they come and they take things right out of my hand. A couple will jump on, like the same way that your dog will push on you with its two front legs if he doesn't pay
Yeah.
attention to you. Yeah, I've got squirrels that will do that to me too if I didn't notice them coming up from behind. Right? And they're phenomenal problem solvers, right? If there's because I also have some sparrows that will come and they eat out of my hand. I can't take credit for that. There's another guy who I think introduced, him and the sparrows, eat out of their hand, but along the way, the sparrows saw me, pulling out bird food, so they came to my hand. So I'll be having the sparrows eating out of my right hand and tossing nuts with my left. But sometimes the pigeons will show up. And I love pigeons too, but I can't feed them because then like 100 of them show up, and that creates issues with humans. So I don't feed them. But it's important to the story. It's relevant because now when there's pigeons around me, the squirrels will look around and they're like, the pigeons will try to will compete with the squirrels and try to intimidate the squirrels. So now the squirrels I watch them, they look and they go, all right, I don't feel like trying to run through a bunch of pigeons. So now I'm going to jump through all that and then just run to the top of the trees, and then they come down to me, through the trees, and we'll just take the nut out of my hand. You've seen them like hang upside down, on their legs, and so they just figure, let's go the path of least resistance. And so it's very interesting to watch them survey a situation and then figure out how they want to engage with it, and demonstrating their different intelligence. And they also have their own personalities, right? Some of them are very gentle. They'll come and, take it. And some of them actually play catch, I'll toss them the nut and they catch. I didn't learn that. They taught me that. They're the ones that stood up and put their hands up. And so I was like, I don't know. So I started tossing it to them and they started catching it. I was like, really cool and fun. And so, yeah. And so it really just, just like humans, they've got their intelligence spectrum. They've got their incarnations and reincarnations. They've got their things that they're here to learn and to contribute and be in service to the planet with. And they've got their own, their own different, forms of intelligence. And so just being able to be trusted by nature to me has just become such a precious, and sacred, experience and moment for me.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. Managed to understand a lot more about what you do and how you're helping people. And I think that you're on this wonderful journey and it's only going to get better. I strongly suggest anyone who's going through any kind of spiritual seeking could get advice from you. They'll benefit from it. Absolutely love this conversation. If there's anything else you'd like to talk about or get into, we can do that. Otherwise, I think I'm all out of questions.
Yeah, no, honestly, I can't thank you enough. We've had a variety of conversations outside of this episode.
Yes.
And, and you've really asked me some questions I've never been asked before. We've gone deep. I really have appreciated your curious minds and, and just and allowing your intuition to guide our conversations. They've all been wonderful. And I appreciate you allowing me into, your little, your spiritual environment and community. So thank you.
Thank you, Graham. This has been wonderful. And we're going to keep our eyes open for you and see what wonderful things you keep doing.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.